Okay, so Fritz Perls took all of this kind of a step further. He definitely built his theory on existential concepts. He incorporated a lot of Rogerian concepts, but he was a contemporary, and I think they all knew what each other was doing. I think that one of the things that's very important is this is one theory that should really only be used by licensed professional counselors. Because a lot of the techniques, and this is really one of the things his theory is famous for, and it's so usable, he just has hundreds and hundreds of Gestalt techniques. But the techniques, if used properly, can result in a very emotional realization and reaction. And you do need to be a trained therapist in order to deal with the reaction. So I just wanted to say that because I know not everybody taking this course is becoming a licensed professional counselor or a trained therapist. So if you're in the ministry or something like that, I think you should definitely make sure that you have enough training to use some of these techniques because of the emotional reactions. And that's with any therapy, but especially some of the Gestalt techniques. Okay, with that said, Fritz worked with his wife Laura quite a bit. I don't think that he gave her enough credit. I think she felt that way herself. Fritz died before Laura, and Laura made some interesting comments, basically lifting up her own contributions to the theory and to her husband's success. So I believe we need to give them both credit. Perls, if you've ever seen the Gloria tapes, was a unique personality. He was somewhat aggressive and sarcastic. That doesn't mean that you cannot use his theory and be kind and patient and incorporate Rogerian foundational skills as well. So I think you can use your own personality and still incorporate a lot of Gestalt techniques. He failed the 7th grade twice, was expelled due to trouble with authority. I can definitely see this in his personality. He wanted to be the authority. He eventually completed school and went on to get a medical degree in psychiatry. Served as a medic for the German Army in World War I. After the war, he worked with Kurt Goldstein, Institute for Brain Damaged Soldiers in Frankfurt. He stressed the holistic personality of the person. Later moved to Vienna, was psychoanalyzed by Wilhelm Reich, who worked very closely with Freud, supervised by Karen Horney, also worked very closely with Freud. I think this concept of the holistic personality, and in fact the term Gestalt means whole, holistic. When he was working with brain-damaged soldiers, he had to look at both the physical injury and the rehabilitation, but he also had to look at the emotional damage as well. So, for instance, they might have called it being shell-shocked back then, but it was really PTSD, and along with physical brain damage as well. And he realized that he had to really treat the whole person, both physical and emotional. In 1946, came to the U.S., broke away from psychoanalysis. He was also Jewish, so he was dealing with a lot of discrimination. 1952, founded the Institute for Gestalt Therapy in New York. Later moved to Big Sur. He kind of really rode the wave of kind of the foundations of psychology, starting with Freud in Vienna, moving to New York, and then out to California. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this theory, but I do want to point out some important parts and some things that I think you might find helpful when dealing with people struggling with spiritual issues or in their own search for meaning. I think the biggest concept that really lends itself to existentialism is the experiential nature of his theory. He can bring up the past, and he would call that unfinished business, places where people got stuck due to trauma or negative environment or whatever it might be. But he would bring the past or the unfinished business into the present through what he would call experiments or techniques. Called them experiments because they were experiential. So he wouldn't leave them in the past. He would manipulate the environment through a technique or experiment so that people could re-experience the emotions in the present and deal with unfinished business from the past to resolve their stuckness and to move forward. So he stressed awareness of thoughts, feelings, actions. People's behavior can be more important than why they behave that way. And he never asked the question why. What, who, when, where, that's fine. But why, he believed, changed the individual's attention from an experience of feeling in the present to the cognitive realm, which was detached from being present. If we think about what we're saying, we're not fully immersed in the present. So he never asked why. He believed that clients were manipulative, tried to avoid responsibility, to avoid anxiety. It's a very different concept than Rogers. He believed in confrontation. I believe we can confront in different ways. Diplomatically, gentle confrontation, pointing out incongruencies as Rogers did. We don't have to be sarcastic or aggressive in order to be confrontational. So let's look at 4 Gestalt principles. Holism. We have to consider and enter into all dimensions of human functioning. Humans in nature are more than the sum of their individual parts. How do these parts fit together? How do they function and interact with the environment? Field theory. An organism must be seen within the context of its ever-changing environment. Everything's related. Everything's in process. What is happening between the individual and his or her environment? The figure formation process. How do individuals organize their environment? So this is based on figure ground pictures. The emerging focus is the figure. The undifferentiated field is the background. Why does one aspect emerge to become the focus? So if we go to the end, you've seen these before. When we look at this picture, which do you see first? Do you see two faces, or do you see a cup or vase? If you see the white vase, that is what's in the foreground, and the black is the background. If you see the two faces, that is the figure in the foreground, and the white is the background. Let's look at the next one. Which do you see first? Do you see the old woman, or do you see the young woman? So, when we think about this, I'm going to relate this to unfinished business. If somebody is stuck in one area of their psychological development, and they come into a session and you use a technique, and unfinished business emerges from the unconscious background to the present focus. That's figure formation process. Unfinished business emerges from the background and becomes the focus of therapy in the present through the use of experiments and techniques. Organismic self-regulation. A new focus or need emerges, one's equilibrium is disturbed. So when that happens, when unfinished business is brought to the present focus, people experience anxiety. This is something that they may have just kept in the background or forgotten, or probably forgotten's probably not the best word, repressed. So in order to recreate a homeostasis or a balance, they have to deal with that unfinished business. He believed that everything needs to be dealt with in the now. Unfinished business, in order to deal with aspects of the past, they're brought into the present through experiments. Unfinished business, feelings from the past which have been suppressed or repressed, these need to be dealt with in therapy. If not, it will affect their equilibrium. Unfinished business can also be expressed in the body through psychosomatic symptoms. Psycho, the mind. Soma, the body. Psychosomatic. Physical symptomology that cannot be explained by a physical illness is caused by the mind. A stuck point is an impasse. He believed that when clients get stuck, they no longer believe that they are self-supporting. People need to experience their true selves rather than denying themselves or wishing they were different. Once this awareness takes place, change can occur. So once again, awareness is key. So let's look at the layers of the human personality. Think about the layers of the onion. And this is where the spirituality really comes into play. So think about what we were talking about, genuineness, things like that with Rogers. Incongruency, real self, things like that. He believed that people move through stages in order to become authentic. So people may play games. They may be phony. And he believed that would be the dead outer layer of an onion, that dry brown skin. He believed truly that people were dead, at least emotionally, if they were being phony? Why live a life if you're not authentic? People play games. People take on personas in order to be accepted because of fear of rejection, because they believe that love and acceptance is conditional in some way, because they don't want to be rejected. They become phony. They don't display their true selves. They take on a persona that is not themselves because they are phobic. People, when they realize they are being phony, the next step is, what's going on? What's taking place that results in them not being genuine? Well, phobic, fear. They want to avoid emotional pain and rejection. So they take on that persona. So then they realize, hey, I am being phony because I am afraid. I fear rejection. The next step in this realization and awareness is impasse. This is the point of stuckness in the maturation process. Something happened. Perhaps they were rejected. Perhaps they were judged. Whatever it might be, they got stuck at some point of their developmental process, at least their emotional development, and it caused them to fear. If you really want to distill one's emotions, most emotions are the result of either fear or love. That's one thing a book called A Course in Miracles talks about. Implosive. So let's say we use experiments and clients realize that they were stuck because they experienced judgment and rejection, and it created fear, and they began playing games and being fake, phony, not genuine. So internally, they resolve to stop playing games, to take risks, to become vulnerable, to be their real selves, no matter what other people think. This is implosive. Their minds awaken. Exposed defenses and facades, getting in touch with our deadness. We're getting to the green core of that onion, the living part, the fresh part. And then, once people take the risk and the resolve to change internally, then that overflows and becomes explosive. They become alive and energized, and their actions change. And they live in a genuine manner, no matter what other people's reactions are. Their actions are no longer based on the judgment of others. He also listed some resistances to contact, and these are very similar to Freud's defense mechanisms, and I'm going to let you go through them. He has various techniques and experiments. These can result in some powerful awareness of the client. Very simple things like I statements, rather than saying, when people are describing their own experience in the present, in order to distance themselves emotionally from their own experience, they might say, well, when you experience something like this trauma, you feel horrible. So why are they saying you? It happened to them. Own it. Use I. Don't distance yourself from it. When I experience a trauma, I feel this way. Metaphor, narrative, body language is very important in Gestalt therapy. Everything from pointing out that somebody is shaking their foot or knee, pointing out anxiety. I usually don't point out what it means. I usually ask, what are you doing? I could say, if your foot could talk, what would it say? Can you exaggerate that movement? How do you feel when you exaggerate that? Lots of different body language. And it's important for therapists to also realize their own body language. Confrontation, we talked a little bit about that, but really it's pointing out inconsistencies, pointing out examples of how they might be stuck or live as not living authentically. I think one of the most powerful things is role play. And a lot of people like using the empty chair. I like doing role plays, asking them to imagine me as someone else. Maybe they have an issue with somebody. Maybe they have unfinished business. It's very powerful with grief and loss and complicated grieving. Imagine I was your father. What would you say to him? Say it to me. Use my name, your father's name. Call me whatever you called your father, Dad, Father, Bill, whatever it might be. And tell me, express what you wish you would have expressed, or what you would like to express to your father. If they're alive, if they're dead, allow your client to say that. I normally don't respond. I usually get up, have the client get up, and we do a role reversal. We exchange places. Now the client is their father, and I'm just using father as an example. I'm the client. The client has a pretty good guess as to how their father might respond. And they might have thought about it before, but to verbalize it out loud will help them to own it. How would your father react? Well, you know I love you even though I never say it. You know I forgive you. I know we had our differences, but you're still my son or daughter. Then we get up again and we change places. And then I usually change the roles a little bit. I usually say, okay, so now you kind of have an idea of what this other person would say, how they would react emotionally. You've been incorporating all this negative self-talk. You've been saying this negative stuff in your mind. But now you know there's a much more positive reaction. So I'm going to be your negative self-talk, your emotion personified. And I'm going to say back all the negative stuff that you've told me you say to yourself in your mind. And you're going to be yourself with this new awareness. You're going to defend yourself against this negative self-talk. And we play through that. And then we always have to process the experiment, whatever it is. And I ask them to glean one of the most powerful statements and come up with one sentence. So next time they begin to say this negative self-talk in their mind, they can respond. They can catch themselves and then respond with this one powerful statement and stop the cycle. Reversal techniques, we talked about that. Rehearsal, exaggeration, staying with the feeling. One of the things new counselors have a hard time doing is they use a technique or an experiment. They get to a deep emotional level with clients. It's uncomfortable. Clients aren't used to it. Therapists may not be comfortable with it when they're new. And the normal reaction is to, oh, okay, so we got to that. Let's resurface. someplace more comfortable. We've got the realization. But you need to stay with that feeling. Process it at the deeper level, whatever that feeling might be. And that is often difficult and anxiety producing. But you really can't overcome the anxiety if you resurface. You've identified things, become aware, but you have to process, you have to move through it in order to overcome it. So this is a lot of kind of theoretical background, and most of you probably know this already. But think about, in your discussion board, how what I've described could be applied to somebody on a spiritual journey, somebody seeking meaning. How do these theories really connect or help the client to connect? First, with their authentic self. Then, with the ability to focus and live in the present. How does that relate on a spiritual level? Okay.